Hello, it's Sonia here with the Pretty Stitch. Welcome to my channel. If this is your first time joining me, I'm so happy to have you here. So today we are going to be making a beanie hat, and this is going to be a tutorial for you to make a hat pretty much to fit any head size. So I'm going to be using an eye hook or a 5.5 millimeter hook, and I'm using this yarn, I don't love this kind of yarn. It's some kind of, I think they used to call it like baby yarn, and it's definitely like a worsted weight. I lost the label, so I have no idea what brand it is. I have a suspicion that it's Red Heart, but I think it'll make a nice hat. And so with this hat, all right, let's focus. There we go. So with this hat, you can use, all different types of yarn. You can use bulky yarn, you can use worsted weight, decayed weight, and you can use whatever hook size that you have. I've already made one, and I used a J hook in worsted weight yarn, and it worked out fine. But for this one, I'm going to use an eye hook and worsted weight with, well, this weird squiggly worsted weight yarn, and it's just to see how it looks for curiosity. So to start, you can already see I've made a chain. So what you're going to want to do is make a chain, and I measured it from under my chin to the top of my head, and then I added a couple extra because I want this one to be a little bit slouchy so that I can turn up the brim if I want to, or however I want to wear it. So for this one I chained 49 chains. For the other sample that you'll see in the photos, I used a J hook or a 6 millimeter hook, and I chained 41 chains. So it just depends on what, who you're making it for and what look you're going for. Okay, so this hat will be made in rows, and then we will turn it into a hat. And it has an almost invisible seam. So to get started on row 1, you're going to yarn over, and in your second chain from your hook, working in the back bump here, we're working a half double crochet. And you're going to continue working in the back bump, working half double crochet all the way down for row 1 here. So at the end of my row, I'm going to have 48 stitches, but you might have a different number, and that's okay. Doesn't matter if it's an odd number, an even number. There's no exact stitch counts with this pattern, but if you want to make the same as me, then certainly feel free. So I did chain 49, and I will have 48 half double crochet at the end of my row 1. So I'm going to keep going here, working my half double crochet, and I will meet you back. Okay, so I have finished up my row 1 here of my half double crochet. So now we are going to chain 1, turn our work for row 2, and we are going to be working in the back loops here. So just looking at the top of the stitches, and we're going to work a slip stitch in that first stitch, and we're going to continue to slip stitch all the way across. So rule of thumb when doing slip stitch is just to keep a nice relaxed tension. You don't want your stitches too tight, because it can be very easy for them to get too tight. But we're just going to work in our back loops here, just slip stitching all the way across for row 2. And for the remainder of the pattern, we will be working in the back loops. And another thing you want to remember for this is whatever you started with your stitch count. So I have 48 stitches. You want to make sure that you have that for the remainder of for the remainder of the pattern. So whatever number that you have, just make sure that that's what you end with, because it can be easy with slip stitching to kind of lose a stitch here and there. So might want to just count every once in a while just to make sure you have the right number of stitches. So I'm just going to keep going, working my slip stitch, and I will meet you back at the end of row 2. All right, so here is row 2 all completed. So what I'm going to do, because some people might not be very familiar working with slip stitch, it's usually just work to join a stitch, but it's its own unique stitch, is I'm going to place a stitch marker in the front loop of my last stitch, And I'm just using this as a guide. Now I don't need to do this anymore because I've done lots of projects with slip stitch and I'm pretty familiar with the stitch. But for those of you that aren't, it's just a little tip. So I'm going to show you. So we're going to chain 1 and turn. So now we are on row 3, and row 3 is, all the odd rows will be the right side. So now we want to work in back loops again across for row 3. So it can be a little bit tricky when you're just looking at the stitch of where the front and back loops are. There just seems to be loops everywhere. So if you put your stitch marker in and give that a little tug, that's the back loop. And I feel like this lighting, let me adjust it here. It's putting this weird glare or something. All right, maybe that's a little better. So then once you pull that, then you can see there's the next loop, there's the next one, there's the next one. Now I'm going to pull this guy out because I don't need it. But for those of you, if you're having trouble finding where to place your hook, it just might be a little helpful tip. So we are going to slip stitch for row 3. And we are also going to do the same thing for row 4. So I'm going to work my row 3, and you're going to want to chain 1 and turn and work in the back loops again for row 4, working slip stitch. And I feel like once you get familiar with the stitch, you shouldn't have any trouble doing this. So I'm going to keep going here, working my slip stitch, and I will meet you back at the end of row 4. So just repeat row 3 for row 4. Okay, I have one more stitch here. And sometimes the last stitch can get a little crunched up. That's why it's important to count your stitches. So this is stitch 48 for me. And so now my row 4 is complete. So let's get ready for row 5. We're going to chain 1, turn our work. And now we are going to work half double crochet all the way across in the back loops. So I'm just turning it, and it helps if you turn the stitches turn your work so you're looking at the tops of your stitches there. That can help you also to see where to work. So I am just turning that, and I'm working in my back loop, working that half double crochet. And I'm just working half double crochet all the way across. So what you're going to want to do for this pattern is you are going to be repeating rows 2 through 5 until your hat can wrap around your head. So you will have to put a couple rows under your belt. So for my other sample that I made with the J hook, I worked 79 rows, because what you're going to want to do is you want to end on a row 3. So this last slip stitch row is row 4. The one before that you're going to want to end on a row 3, and then we will join our ends for our invisible seam, or almost invisible, so that it looks more like a hat. So if you were using a J hook and worsted weight, 79 rows might be enough for you. I don't know how many rows I'm going to need for this one, since I'm using a smaller hook and slightly different yarn. So I will let you know. So I will meet you back when this guy is long enough. I think it'll be more than 79 rows, but I know it seems like a lot. It's a little bit different than working in the round, but it does work up pretty fast. So, give it a shot. So I will meet you back. Okay, so here we go. Here is my hat. I ended on a row 79, which is a row 3. So that would be part of the slip stitch of our sequence, because our sequence is working rows 2 through 5. So 2, 3, and 4 would be the slip stitch rows, and then row 5 is the half double crochet row. So again, I worked up to row 79. You can certainly work more rows. You just work enough until it fits around your head. You don't want it to be super loose, but you don't want it to be super tight. And just keep in mind that this is a flexible fabric, so it does have a little bit of stretch to it. So you want to end on a row 3, and now we're going to get ready to start turning this into a hat. and we are going to create an almost invisible seam. Now you can sew this if you prefer, but I prefer stitching because I don't like sewing. So how we're going to do that is we are going to chain 1 and we're going to turn, and you can already see that I've matched up my ends here. So this is my last row I worked, and then this is the end of row 1 here. So I've matched these guys up, and you want your right side facing. So you want the wrong sides touching, right side facing. So now we're going to turn. So again, I have the ends of my row here, both rows. So let's get my working yarn. So what we're going to do is we're going to join these ends. We're going to slip stitch across because we have to work 1 more slip stitch row because we've worked 3 slip stitch rows in part of our sequence. So let's get started here. So how we're going to join these ends is I've already chained 1, so we've turned, and so what I have is the end of row 1 is the part that's closer to me, and we're going to work in the front loops in this row. So this is the ends of row 1, and we're going to work in front loops for this entire row when we join. And then the end of your last row, which happens to be my row 79, I'm working in the back loops for that row. And we're going to slip stitch all the way across to create that final slip stitch row. So I'm going to find the front loop there, and I'm going to find the back loop. And there we go. So we've got our 3 loops on our hook. We're just going to work a slip stitch through all of those loops. And you are going to do that all the way across. I'm going to find the front loop and then find the back loop and work my slip stitch. And I'm just going to keep going here. So again, if you want to sew this instead, you certainly can do that, but I mean, you don't have to. This creates an almost invisible seam. So the nice thing with this hat is you don't have to worry about a seam showing and, you know, making sure that that's in the back. I mean, I've even seen that with some knit hats where, you know, there's an obvious seam and, you know, you don't want that in the front of your hat. But with this one, you know, you'd have to really look closely to find the seam. So, which is a nice thing about this pattern. So I'm going to keep going, just working my final slip stitch row, and I will meet you back, and then we're going to get ready to take care of this part of the hat, the opening. So I'm going to keep going here and I will meet you back. Okay, so I have finished stitching across. So when you look at it, that is that final slip stitch row. You can barely see the join there, which is really nice. It's just slightly thicker than the other guys, but if nobody, you know, really knew, you know, the average person is not going to see that that's where it was seamed. Alright, so now we need to close up this big hole. So what you could do is you can cut this yarn, leave a nice long tail, and you can take your yarn needle and thread it through and then pull it shut, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to show you a technique that I came up with that I borrowed from knitting, and some people have liked it, some people don't. You know, so if you don't like it, you don't have to do it. You can just sew the hole closed. But I think it leaves a nice clean closed hole, and it's really not too hard. It's a little bit fiddly, but if you're an experienced crocheter, you shouldn't have any trouble with this. So what you're going to need is you're going to need two or three more hooks. So here I have my hooks all ready to go. You also will want your hooks to be straight. Now if you do have the hooks with a thicker handle, you could do this technique with that, using those type of hooks. You just might need to use a little bit more than just 3. You can use as many hooks as you need. They do not have to be the same size. So I happen to have all I hooks 5.5 millimeters, but if you have a J hook or an H or even a G, I think that would be fine. I wouldn't go up to a K hook. I think it's better if you go like 2 sizes down or just 1 size up, but not 2 sizes up. I think then, because you want your hole to be on the tighter side, So as long as you have hooks that are close to your original size, it's fine. Alright, so why don't we get started. So what we're going to do is we're going to be pulling up loops all around this top here. So how we're going to do that, I'm going to chain one here to get started. I'm just going to insert my hook in the end of that row and just pull up a loop. I'm not going to work it off. Now what I like to do, and I think it makes it nice and neat and tidy, is here is the ends of our slip stitch row, and you can kind of see there's like a hole right in the middle there. I just poke my hook into that hole, pull up a loop, and it just looks nice and neat and tidy. And I'm going to go in the next one, and I'm going to just pull up a loop here. So I'm just pulling up one in this half double crochet row, and then in that hole there, in that slip stitch row, and then right there. I mean, you can pull up your loops wherever you want on the ends of your rows. This is just how I like to do it. And what you do is you just pull up as many loops as you can fit on your first hook. You don't want them sliding off, so I'm not sure how many I'm going to get on here, so we'll just see how many we can get. And I've used this technique quite a bit on hats that you work bottom up. I've used this on socks, anything that needs a closed hole when you're finishing up your project. I don't like sewing, and I just think it looks a little bit nicer, looks a little bit neater, looks a little bit tidier, just like a cleaner finish. But again, if you're really hating this method, find it too fiddly, then, you know, certainly go ahead and sew it. I think I'll just do maybe 3 more, and then we will have enough on this hook. Okay, so I think that's about enough for that one. So once you have fit as many loops as you can on your one hook, you're going to grab your next hook. So here we go, I've got my next one. And I am just going to insert my hook into that next stitch where I would want to pull up a loop. Here's my working yarn. So you do want to make sure your last loop on your previous hook is just snug on there. You don't want it loose before you grab your working yarn, and we're just going to pull up a loop, and we're going to keep going with the next hook, pulling up as many as you can. Now in a smaller hole, you probably only need 2 hooks, but I have used up to 5 hooks with this technique. It just depends on what you're making and what's easier for you. And you're just going all the way around, so you just see I'm spinning it around. I'm going to fit as many loops as I can on this hook, and then I'll do the same thing with my third one. And if you needed a 4th hook or a 5th hook, you know, it's fine. You can do that. Use as many as you need. And I'm going to grab my 3rd hook. So here we go. 3rd one's ready to go. Doing the same thing, making sure that last loop is on there pretty good. Pulling up that loop, and I'm just continuing. Okay, so I'm just going to do these last 2 in the part of that slip stitch. Okay, so see, I just want to make sure those guys are on. So now you can see, there we go, focus. So we have all of our hooks on the ends of our rows there. So now we have to work all these stitches off, and what we're going to do is we're going to yarn over. You're going to go in your last hook you used, and we actually are going to make a giant slip stitch all the way around and working through all these loops. So you're really just yarning over one time and then slipping it all the way through. And you can want to do it a little bit carefully, because you don't, if you miss one, then you kind of have to start over, and that's pain. So here's my working yarn. I'm going to do that yarn over, and I'm just going to start that slip stitch. And you can just take your time. You can do one at a time, two at a time. If you're feeling really brave, like I just did 3. You just don't want your loop to fall off. Okay, so I have worked off all of those loops for this guy. So what you need to do is you're going to go to your next hook, take that loop, and pop it on the next hook. There we go. Put that one aside, and just put that working yarn, give it a little tug. You want that on there a little bit snugly, and you're just going to keep going, pulling through the loops one at a time. Okay, so now we need to pop this loop onto our last hook. There we go. And you just keep going. We're almost done here. Okay, so there is my last one. It's getting nice and cinched. So what you're going to do to finish it up is we need to cut the yarn. So here's my scissors. And then what you want to do is you want to give it a good tug. So give that a nice tug, and then what I like to do to kind of finish it off is I'll take my hook and I'll put it inside the hat. I'll poke it through that hole there. See, like that, and then I grab that yarn, like to pull it through on the wrong side of the hat, and then I stick my hand in there. Like to just kind of give it a good tug on the wrong side, and you can see I'm tugging pretty hard, and that just gives it a nicer finish doing that. So there you can see you have a nice neat closed hole. So what you'll need to do for this guy is, if you need to weave in any ends, certainly do that. Block your hat if you need to, and then you're all set for wearing, and you can turn it up, or depending how long you made your chain to start with, your hat might not be as slouchy as mine will be. But I hope you enjoyed this project, and if you did, please like and subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.